The Louisiana morning sun cast long shadows across the freeway as Shaquille O'Neal's black SUV cruised toward Newark, New Jersey. In the passenger seat, his eldest son, Sharif, scrolled through his phone, while in the back, Shakir and Miles exchanged jokes about their latest gaming sessions. The air conditioning hummed softly, a stark contrast to the sweltering heat building outside. "Dad, why exactly are we going to Newark again?" Sharif asked, finally looking up from his screen. "I thought we were just visiting Grandma." Shaq's massive hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. Through his sunglasses, his eyes focused on the road ahead, but his mind was already decades in the past. "We are visiting Grandma," he said, his deep voice carrying a weight his sons hadn't heard before. "But there's something else I need you boys to see first." The suburbs of New Jersey began to give way to older, more weathered neighborhoods. The pristine lawns and manicured hedges gradually disappeared, replaced by chain-link fences and buildings that had seen better decades. Sharif noticed the change first, his expression shifting from casual curiosity to quiet observation. "I've told you stories about where I came from," Shaq continued, slowing the vehicle as they entered a familiar area. "But stories aren't enough anymore. You're men now, or becoming men. You need to understand what shaped me, what made me who I am." Shakir leaned forward between the front seats. "Is this really where you grew up, Dad? It looks so different from what you're used to," Shaq finished, pulling into a parking spot along a street lined with modest apartment buildings. "That's exactly why we're here, son." The three young men stepped out of the SUV, immediately feeling the humid New Jersey air wrap around them like a heavy blanket. The street was alive with the sounds of urban life, children playing in a nearby courtyard, music drifting from open windows, the distant rumble of traffic. But there was something else in the air, a sense of community, of people who looked out for each other despite having little themselves. Shaq stood beside his sons, all of them towering figures, but none quite matching their father's legendary 7'1" frame. He pointed down the street to a weathered brick building with narrow windows and a small front stoop. "That's where your grandmother and I lived when I was about your age, Sharif," he said quietly. "Third floor, apartment 3B. That little window on the left, that was my bedroom. Well, half of it. I shared it with your uncle." Miles, the youngest, stared at the building with wide eyes. "Dad, that's so small. How did you even fit in there?" A slight smile crossed Shaq's face. "I didn't, really. By the time I was 16, my feet hung off the end of my bed, and I had to duck under doorways. But that little apartment, it taught me everything about making do with what you have." As they began walking down the sidewalk, neighbors started to notice them. An elderly woman sitting on her stoop did a double-take, then broke into a huge smile. "Shaquille? Shaquille O'Neal? Lord have mercy. Is that really you?" Shaq's entire demeanor changed, the serious father transforming into the warm, engaging man his sons knew from public appearances. "Mrs. Rodriguez, how are you doing, ma'am?" The woman struggled to her feet, and Shaq immediately moved to help her, his gentle touch a stark contrast to his imposing size. "I haven't seen you in, oh, it must be 15 years. And these are your boys?" "Yes, ma'am. These are my sons. Boys, this is Mrs. Rodriguez. She used to give me extra groceries when she knew we were running low." Mrs. Rodriguez waved off the compliment, but Sharif caught the way her eyes moistened slightly. "Your father was always such a good boy," she told them in accented English. "Even when he got famous, even when he had all that money, he never forgot where he came from. Every Christmas he would send money for the community center." The sons exchanged glances. This was news to them. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you don't need to—" Shaq started, but she cut him off with a firm hand gesture. "No, no. These boys need to know. Their father, he's a good man. Not because of basketball, but because of his heart." As they continued down the street, more neighbors emerged. Word traveled fast in tight-knit communities, especially when a 7-foot celebrity was walking the sidewalks. But what struck the sons most wasn't the recognition their father received. It was the genuine affection, the respect that went both ways. "Dad, Shakir said quietly as they approached a small playground surrounded by a chain-link fence. You never told us about sending money to the community center. Shaq stopped walking and turned to face his sons. The playground behind him was filled with children, their laughter echoing off the surrounding buildings. There's a lot I haven't told you boys. Not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because I wanted you to see it for yourselves first. He gestured toward the playground, where a group of teenagers was playing basketball on a court with nets that had seen better days, and rims that sat slightly askew. That's where I learned to play. Not in some fancy gym with perfect floors and brand new equipment. Right there, on that cracked asphalt, with a ball that barely bounced. Sharif, who had grown up with private trainers and state-of-the-art facilities, stared at the court with new eyes. Did you really get good playing here? I got hungry playing here, Shaq corrected. Hungry to be better. Hungry to have more. Hungry to get my family out of that tiny apartment. The skill came later, with practice and coaching. But the hunger, that came from right here. As if summoned by their conversation, one of the teenagers on the court recognized Shaq and came jogging over. He was maybe 17, wearing a faded Lakers jersey that had clearly seen many washings. Yo, you're Shaq, right? The real Shaq? The young man's voice carried excitement, but also a kind of respectful caution. That's me, young man. What's your name? Marcus, sir. Marcus Williams. I play varsity at the high school. He gestured toward his friends on the court, who were now all staring over with a mixture of awe and curiosity. You any good, Marcus? Shaq asked with a grin. I mean, I'm all right. Nothing like you were, though. My grandma, she always talks about watching you play when you were young. Said you were different even then. Shaq's expression grew more serious. Different how? Marcus shifted his weight, suddenly seeming younger than his 17 years. She said you played like you had something to prove. Like basketball wasn't just a game for you. It was your way out. The words hung in the humid air, and Shaq's sons felt something shift in their understanding of their father. They had always known he was a great basketball player, a Hall of Famer, a legend. But standing on this street, listening to this teenager who barely knew him speak about his grandmother's memories, they began to grasp something deeper. Your grandmother's a smart woman, Marcus, Shaq said finally. Basketball was my way out, but more than that, it was my way to bring others with me. He pulled out his phone and handed it to Sharif. Take a picture of us, son. As Sharif snapped the photo, Shaq put his massive arm around Marcus's shoulders. Keep working hard, young man. And remember, talent might get you noticed, but character gets you remembered. After Marcus returned to his friends, who immediately swarmed him for details about the encounter, the O'Neill family continued their walk. The sun was climbing higher, and the heat was becoming oppressive, but none of them suggested going back to the air-conditioned SUV. Dad, Miles said as they paused in front of a small corner store with a faded awning, why didn't you ever bring us here before? Shaq was quiet for a long moment, watching as people went about their daily lives around them. A mother pushed a stroller while talking animatedly on her phone. An elderly man swept the sidewalk in front of his building with methodical precision. Two young girls jumped rope near a fire hydrant, their sing-song chants creating a rhythm that seemed to match the heartbeat of the neighborhood. Because I wanted you to be ready to understand it, he said finally. When you're young, you just see the differences. The smaller apartments, the older cars, the stores that aren't as fancy. I needed you to be old enough to see past all that, to see the strength, the community, the love that exists here. Sharif nodded slowly. It's not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Something sadder, I guess. More broken. Shaq smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he'd worn since they'd arrived. That's the thing about home, son. It's never just about the buildings or the money. It's about the people and how they take care of each other. This neighborhood raised me, and everyone in it had a hand in making me who I am today. As they stood there, absorbing the life and energy of the street, none of them could have predicted what they would discover in the next few hours. Stories that would change how they saw not just their father, but themselves and their place in the world. The real journey was just beginning. The corner store, Mr. Chen had owned for 37 years hadn't changed much since Shaq's childhood. The same handwritten signs advertising cold drinks and lottery tickets still decorated the windows, and the bell above the door still chimed with the same off-key note when customers entered. What had changed was Mr. Chen himself. Now in his 70s, his movement slower but his smile just as warm. "Shaquille!" The elderly man's face lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. My boy, you came back." Shaq had to bend considerably to embrace the small man, and his sons watched as their father's eyes glistened with genuine emotion. "Mr. Chen, how are you? You look exactly the same." "Ah, you're a terrible liar, but I forgive you." Mr. Chen's English still carried the accent of his native Taiwan, even after 4 decades in America. "These are your sons? They're so tall, just like their father. Boys, this is Mr. Chen. He practically raised me after school." Mr. Chen waved dismissively but was, clearly pleased. "Your father, he would come here every day after school. Sometimes he had money for candy, sometimes he didn't, but I always made sure he had something to eat." Shakir stepped forward, extending his hand politely. "It's nice to meet you, sir. Dad never told us about you." "Because your father is modest," Mr. Chen said, shaking the young man's hand. "He doesn't like to talk about the help he needed. But let me tell you something. When he made it big in basketball, you know what he did?" The 3 sons shook their heads. Mr. Chen walked behind his counter and pulled out a framed photograph. It showed a much younger Shaq in his Lakers uniform, standing next to Mr. Chen in front of the store. But what caught their attention was what Shaq was holding. A large check. "He paid for my daughter's college tuition," Mr. Chen said quietly. "All 4 years. She's a doctor now, has her own practice in California. He never asked for anything back, never wanted recognition. Just said, 'Mr. Chen, you took care of me when I needed it.'" Sharif felt something tighten in his chest. "Dad, you never—" "There's a lot I never told you boys," Shaq said softly. "Mr. Chen, can you tell them about the winter when the heat went out?" The old man's expression grew serious. "Ah, that was a hard time. You were maybe 14, 15. The building's heating system broke in January. Dead of winter, snow on the ground, and everyone in the building freezing." He moved to straighten some items on his shelf, his hands keeping busy while he remembered. "Your father, he was just a boy, but he organized everyone. He came to every business on this street, asking if we could donate space heaters, blankets, anything to help. He didn't ask for himself. He asked for the elderly people in the building, the families with babies." Miles found himself hanging on every word. "What happened?" "The whole neighborhood came together. I gave what I could. The restaurant down the street provided hot meals. The church opened their doors for people who needed warm places to sleep. But it was your father who made it happen. A 14-year-old boy, organizing grown adults." Mr. Chen turned back to them, his eyes serious. "That's when I knew he was special. Not because he was tall, not because he could play basketball, but because he understood that being strong meant protecting others." As they left the store, Mr. Chen pressed a bag of candy into each of their hands, the same kind he used to give their father. Walking down the street, the brothers were unusually quiet, processing what they'd heard. Their next stop was the community center, a modest building that had been expanded since Shaq's childhood but still retained its humble character. Inside, they were greeted by Maria Santos, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and eyes that sparkled with energy. "Shaq, oh my goodness, look at you!" She embraced him warmly, then stepped back to study his face. "You look good, mijo. Success agrees with you, but you still have that same sweet smile. Maria, these are my sons. Boys, this is Ms. Santos. She runs this place and basically kept me out of trouble when I was your age." Maria laughed. "Kept you out of trouble? Boy, you were trouble. But good trouble. The kind that meant you cared too much about everything." She led them through the center, past rooms where children were doing homework, teenagers were playing ping pong, and elderly people were participating in what looked like a gentle exercise class. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades, children at various events, teenagers graduating from high school, Young adults in military uniforms or college graduation gowns. Your father spent so much time here, Maria explained as they walked. After school, weekends, summers, he was like my assistant coach, my helper, my right-hand man. What did he help with? Sharif asked. Everything. Reading to the little kids, helping with homework, organizing the older kids for basketball games. But you know what he was best at? They shook their heads. Making the new kids feel welcome. You have to understand, this neighborhood sees a lot of families moving in and out. Military families, people looking for work, families going through hard times. When new kids came to the center, they were often scared, lonely, didn't know anyone. She stopped in front of a particular photograph, a young Shaq, maybe 16, surrounded by a group of much smaller children, all of them laughing at something he was saying. Your father had this gift. He could walk up to a shy kid who had been sitting alone for weeks, and within 5 minutes, they'd be laughing and playing with the other children. He made everyone feel like they belonged. Shaquille studied the photograph intently. His father looked so young, but even then, his presence seemed to fill the frame. Did he ever talk about playing professional basketball back then? Maria smiled. Oh, sure. All the kids dreamed about making it big. But your father was different. He used to say that even if he made it to the NBA, he'd still come back here. We all thought it was just kid talk, you know. But then, she gestured around the room, and for the first time, the brothers noticed details they'd missed. A plaque near the entrance that read, O'Neill Family Learning Center. New computers in the homework room. A small plaque on the wall listing major donors, with their father's name prominently displayed. He kept his promise, Maria continued. Every year without fail, he sends a check. But more than that, he sends personal notes to kids who are struggling, encouraging them to stay in school. He funds scholarships for kids who want to go to college. Last year, he paid for the entire summer program so we could stay open when we were about to close due to budget cuts. The weight of these revelations was beginning to settle on the three young men. They had always known their father was generous with his money. They'd seen him tip servers extravagantly, donate to charities, help out friends in need. But this was different. This was systematic, personal, deeply rooted in who he was. Why doesn't he ever talk about this stuff? Miles asked, more to himself than to anyone else. Maria overheard him. Because for your father, it's not about getting credit. It's about paying forward what he received. This community gave him love, support, and opportunities when he needed them most. Now he gives back because that's what family does for each other. Family? Sharif questioned. Maria gestured around the room at the children doing homework, the teenagers playing games, the elderly people chatting and laughing together. This is all family, mijo. Not by blood, but by choice. By showing up for each other, day after day, year after year. As they prepared to leave the community center, Maria pulled Shaq aside. You did good with these boys, she said quietly, but loud enough for them to hear. They have good hearts. I can see it in their eyes. They're still learning, Shaq replied. We all are. That's the most important lesson of all, Maria said, then turned to address the sons directly. Your father learned something here that no amount of money can buy and no amount of fame can teach. He learned that true strength isn't about what you can do for yourself. It's about what you do for others when no one's watching. Outside the community center, the afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the street. The three brothers walked in contemplative silence, each processing what they'd learned about their father in just a few hours. Dad, Sharif finally said, I have to ask you something. Go ahead, son. Why didn't you tell us about all this before? The donations, the scholarships, helping Mr. Chen's daughter. We had no idea. Shaq stopped walking and turned to face his sons. Behind him, the community center buzzed with activity, children's laughter drifting through the open windows. Because I didn't want you to give back out of obligation, or because you thought you had to live up to something I did, he said carefully. I wanted you to find your own reasons to help others, your own way of making a difference. Charity isn't about following someone else's playbook. It's about responding to what breaks your heart and what fills your soul. Shakir nodded slowly. But doesn't seeing this help us understand what breaks your heart? Shaq smiled, pride evident in his expression. That's exactly why I brought you here today, son. Because now you're ready to see it. As they continued their walk through the neighborhood, none of them knew that their most profound discovery still lay ahead. A revelation that would not only change how they saw their father's past, but illuminate their own path forward. The late afternoon sun hung heavy in the sky as the O'Neill family made their way toward the old high school. The building loomed ahead of them, its red brick facade weathered by decades of harsh New Jersey winters and humid summers. What had once been the pride of the neighborhood now showed its age. Windows that needed updating, a parking lot with more cracks than smooth pavement, and a chain-link fence that surrounded the property like a protective embrace. "This is where it all really started," Shaq said as they approached the main entrance. "Not the basketball part that started on the playground we saw earlier, but the dreaming part, the believing that maybe I could be something more than what anyone expected." Sharif looked up at the building with curiosity. "It looks so normal." "That's because it is normal," Shaq replied. "Most dreams don't start in fancy places, son. They start in normal places with normal people who decide to believe in something extraordinary." As they walked around the building toward the gymnasium, they encountered a man in his 60s cleaning the windows of the main office. He was methodical in his work, taking pride in making each pane of glass spotless despite the age of the building. "Excuse me," Shaq called out. "Is Coach Williams still around?" The man turned, and his eyes widened in recognition. "Shaquille O'Neal. Well, I'll be damned." He set down his cleaning supplies and extended a weathered hand. "I'm Tom Morrison. I was the janitor here when you played. Still am, actually." Shaq shook the man's hand warmly. "Mr. Morrison, I remember you. You were always here late, making sure everything was perfect for the games." Tom's face cracked into a wide grin. "You remember that? Most kids never noticed the custodial staff." "You kidding me? You used to slip me extra towels when I was sweating through everything they gave me, and you always made sure the floors were perfect before games." The three sons watched this exchange with growing fascination. Here was yet another person from their father's past who clearly held genuine affection for him. "Coach Williams retired about 5 years ago," Tom explained, "but he still lives right here in the neighborhood. In fact, he comes by most days to help with the current team. He's probably in the gym right now. They have practice this afternoon." As they walked toward the gymnasium, Tom fell into step beside them. "Your boys ever hear the story about the state championship?" he asked Shaq. "Which one?" Shaq replied with a slight smile. "You know." "Which one?" "The one where you almost didn't play." Miles perked up immediately. "What? Dad, you never told us you almost didn't play in a championship." Tom chuckled. "Oh, this is a good story. Your father was probably 18 at the time. Senior year. Biggest game of his high school career, college scouts everywhere. The whole neighborhood planning to watch on TV because we'd made it to the state finals for the first time in school history." They reached the gymnasium doors, and Tom paused his story to unlock them. "The thing is, your father almost missed the whole thing because he was in the hospital." "The hospital?" Shakir asked, alarm in his voice. "Not because he was hurt," Tom quickly clarified. "Because Mrs. Washington from his building—" "You remember Mrs. Washington, Shaq? She had fallen down the stairs the day before the championship game, broke her hip, was all alone, scared, and in pain." Shaq's expression grew soft at the memory. "She didn't have any family nearby?" "That's right," Tom continued as they entered the gym. "So while the whole team was resting up for the biggest game of their lives, your father spent the entire night in the hospital waiting room, making sure Mrs. Washington wasn't alone." The gymnasium hadn't changed much since Shaq's playing days. The same wooden floors, the same retractable bleachers, the same slightly musty smell that comes from decades of teenage sweat and determination. But what struck the sons most was how small it seemed. They had grown up watching their father's NBA games in massive arenas, but this space felt intimate, personal. "Coach Williams found him there the next morning," Tom continued, "still in the same clothes from the day before, sleeping in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs. The championship game was in 6 hours. A voice from across the gym interrupted the story. Is that the story about the time Shaq nearly gave me a heart attack? They turned to see a tall, distinguished black man in his 70s walking toward them with the confident stride of someone who had spent decades commanding respect from teenagers. Despite his age, Coach Robert Williams still carried himself like the athlete he had once been. "Coach!" Shaq's face lit up as he embraced the older man. "You look great. These are my sons, Sharif, Shaquille, and Miles." Coach Williams shook each of their hands, studying their faces with the practiced eye of someone who had worked with young people for decades. "You got good kids, Shaq. I can tell just by looking at them." "Tom was just telling them about the state championship," Shaq said. Coach Williams laughed and shook his head. "That boy nearly killed me that day. 6 hours before the biggest game in school history, and I find my star player asleep in a hospital chair because he was worried about an elderly neighbor." "What happened?" Sharif asked. "Well, first I was furious," Coach Williams admitted. "I mean, we'd worked all season for this opportunity. College recruiters were going to be there. This was his chance to showcase his talents on the biggest stage." The coach walked over to the center of the court, and they all followed. "But then I really looked at him. He was exhausted, worried sick about this old woman who wasn't even a relative, who most kids would have just forgotten about. And I realized something important." "What?" Miles prompted. "I realized that the character that made him stay with Mrs. Washington all night was the same character that made him a great basketball player. The discipline, the loyalty, the willingness to sacrifice for others, those weren't separate parts of who he was. They were all connected." Coach Williams gestured toward the basket, where a faded championship banner hung from the rafters. "We won that game. Your father played like a man possessed, scored 38 points, grabbed 22 rebounds. But more importantly, Mrs. Washington watched the whole thing from her hospital bed because your father had arranged for the nursing staff to wheel a TV into her room." The current high school team was beginning to filter into the gym for their afternoon practice, and several of them recognized Shaq immediately. But Coach Williams held up a hand, indicating they should wait a moment. "You want to know what makes your father special?" he asked the sons. "It's not the basketball skills, though those were incredible. It's not the money or the fame, though he's handled both better than most. It's the fact that he never forgot that his success was built on the foundation that other people laid for him." A young player, maybe 16 years old, couldn't contain his excitement any longer, and approached cautiously. "Excuse me, Mr. O'Neal. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Could I maybe ask you something?" Shaq turned to the teenager with a warm smile. "Of course, young man. What's your name?" "Jamal, sir. Jamal Thompson. I play center, just like you did." "How tall are you, Jamal?" 6'8", sir. "Still growing, my mom says." Shaq studied the young man, seeing something of himself in the teenager's eager expression. "What did you want to ask me?" Jamal shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Well, sir, I'm good at basketball. Really good. But I'm not great yet, you know. And sometimes I wonder if I'm just wasting my time dreaming about playing in college, or maybe even the pros." The gymnasium grew quiet. Even the other players who had been warming up stopped to listen. "Let me ask you something, Jamal," Shaq said. "When you play basketball, how does it make you feel?" "Like I can do anything, sir. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "And when you're not playing basketball, what do you think about?" Jamal grinned. "Basketball, sir. Pretty much all the time." Shaq nodded seriously. "Then you're not wasting your time. Dreams aren't about guarantees, son. They're about following what calls to your heart and working harder than everyone else is willing to work." He gestured toward his own sons. "But here's what I want you to remember, and what I want my boys to remember too. Basketball might be your dream, but it can't be your only identity. You have to be a complete person first. Someone who cares about others. Someone who gives back to his community. Someone who remembers where he came from." Coach Williams stepped forward. "Jamal, tell Mr. O'Neal what you do after school when you're not practicing." Jamal looked a bit embarrassed. "I tutor some of the younger kids in math, and I help my grandmother with her grocery shopping every week." "See?" Shaq said, his voice filled with approval. "That's what I'm talking about. That's the foundation that everything else gets built on." As the team began their practice, Coach Williams pulled the O'Neal family aside. "I want to show you something," he said, leading them to a small office adjacent to the gym. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades of teams, individual players, and championship moments. But in the place of honor, behind the coach's desk, was a framed letter. "Your father wrote me this about 10 years ago," Coach Williams explained. "I'd like to read part of it to your boys, if that's okay." Shaq nodded, though he looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention. Coach Williams picked up the letter and began to read. "Coach Williams, I wanted to write to thank you for teaching me that basketball was never just about basketball. Every time you made us run extra laps for showing poor sportsmanship, every time you benched someone for not keeping their grades up, every time you reminded us that we represented something bigger than ourselves, you were preparing us for life, not just games. The discipline you taught me on the court is what helped me succeed off the court. The teamwork you emphasized is what taught me the value of community. The respect you demanded from us is what taught me to respect others. I am who I am today because you saw something in a tall, awkward kid from the projects and helped me see it in myself." The office fell silent as Coach Williams finished reading. Outside, they could hear the sounds of the current team practicing, the squeak of sneakers on hardwood, the bounce of basketballs, the sharp whistle of instruction. "He sent that letter along with a check to fund a scholarship program," Coach Williams added quietly. "Every year we're able to send 2 kids from this school to college because of your father's generosity." Sharif felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Dad, why do you keep all of this a secret?" Shaq was quiet for a long moment, watching through the office window as Jamal worked on his post moves with the same determination Shaq had once brought to this very court. "Because the moment you start doing good things for recognition, they stop being good things," he said finally. "They become performances, and the people who need help deserve better than performances. They deserve genuine care." As they prepared to leave the school, Coach Williams walked them back toward the main entrance. "Your father learned something here that I hope you boys will learn too," he said. "Success isn't about how high you rise. It's about how many people you lift up with you." The setting sun cast long shadows across the school courtyard as they said their goodbyes. Tomorrow they would visit Shaq's childhood apartment and meet the woman who had shaped him, more than anyone else. But tonight, as they drove through the familiar streets of his youth, the 3 sons sat in contemplative silence, beginning to understand that their father's greatest victories had never been recorded in any record book. The real game had always been about something much more important than basketball. The morning of their final day in Newark dawned gray and overcast, with thick clouds promising rain before the day was through. Shaq stood at the window of their hotel room looking out at the city skyline in the distance, while his 3 sons finished getting ready for what he had told them would be the most important part of their journey. "Dad, you've been quiet all morning," Sharif observed as he adjusted his shirt. "You nervous about something?" Shaq turned from the window and his sons could see something they rarely witnessed in their father's expression: vulnerability. "I guess I am a little. It's one thing to show you where I came from. It's another thing to show you who made me who I am." An hour later they stood in front of the same weathered brick building they had seen on their first day. But now they were here for a different purpose. Instead of just observing from the street, they were going inside. Shaq pulled out a set of keys that looked older than his sons. "Grandma gave me these when I bought my first house," he explained. "Said I should always have a way to come home." The narrow stairwell smelled of decades of cooking. A mixture of spices and comfort that spoke to the diversity of families who had called this building home over the years. By the 3rd floor, all of them were breathing harder, and Shaq had to duck to avoid hitting his head on the low ceiling. "Apartment 3B, he said, stopping in front of a door that had been painted many times but still showed the wear of countless hands turning the handle. "Boys, I want you to meet the most important person in my life." Before he could knock, the door swung, open to reveal a woman in her 70s, small in stature, but with eyes that held the wisdom and strength of someone who had faced life's challenges head-on and emerged victorious. Lucille O'Neill's face lit up with pure joy at the sight of her son and grandsons. "There's my baby," she said, reaching up to embrace Shaq despite the significant height difference. "And my beautiful grandsons. Come in, come in. I've been cooking all morning." The apartment was exactly as small as it had appeared from the outside, but it was filled with warmth, family photographs, and the kind of love that makes any space feel like a palace. The living room could barely contain all four of the tall men, but somehow it felt perfect. "Grandma, it smells incredible in here," Miles said, kissing his grandmother's cheek. "Well, I made your daddy's favorites, though I don't know how we're all going to fit around that little table," she laughed, gesturing toward a dining table that seated 4 people comfortably, or 2 people the size of the O'Neill men. As they settled into the cramped but cozy space, Lucille began bringing out dish after dish of food that seemed impossible to have come from such a tiny kitchen. Fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, cornbread, and sweet potato pie. Each dish prepared with the kind of love that only comes from decades of feeding a family on a tight budget, but an unlimited heart. "Grandma, you didn't have to make all this," Sharif protested, though his eyes were wide with appreciation. "Hush, child. When my boys come home, I cook. That's what mothers do." She settled into her chair, which was positioned so she could see all of them at once. "Now, your daddy tells me he's been showing you around the neighborhood." "Yes, ma'am," Shakir replied. "We met Mr. Chen and Ms. Santos at the community center, and Coach Williams." Lucille's expression grew soft with fondness. "Oh, those are good people, real good people. They helped raise your daddy when I was working 3 jobs just to keep food on this table." The room fell quiet at this revelation. Shaq had mentioned his humble beginnings, but hearing his mother speak so matter-of-factly about working 3 jobs hit the sons differently. "3 jobs?" Miles asked quietly. "Oh yes, baby. I cleaned offices at night, worked at a factory during the day, and did laundry for other families on weekends. Your daddy was what they call a latchkey kid. Came home to an empty apartment most days, had to learn to take care of himself real early." She reached over and patted Shaq's massive hand with her small one. "But he never complained. Not once. Even when he was so tall he could barely fit in that little bed in the back room. Even when he had to wear the same shoes for 2 years because we couldn't afford new ones that came in his size." "Mama," Shaq said gently, "you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," she interrupted with the authority that only mothers possess. "These boys need to understand what you came from, what you overcame, and why you are the way you are." She turned her attention back to her grandsons. "Your daddy could have been angry about our situation. Lord knows he had reason to be. Other kids had fathers around, had money for nice clothes and fancy basketball shoes. But instead of being bitter, he decided to be better." Lucille stood up and walked to a small bookshelf in the corner of the room. She pulled out a worn photo album and brought it back to the table. "Let me show you something." The first photograph she showed them was of a teenage Shaq, but he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by elderly people, and they were all laughing at something he was saying. "Every Saturday, your daddy would go to the senior center down the street and spend the day with the older folks. He'd read to them, play cards with them, help them write letters to their families. The staff there said he was the most popular volunteer they'd ever had." She flipped to another page. "And here, he is helping Mrs. Patterson move into her new apartment. She was a single mother with 4 kids, and your daddy spent his entire weekend carrying her furniture up 3 flights of stairs." Photo after photo revealed a side of young Shaq that even his stories hadn't fully captured. Here was a teenager who, despite having very little himself, consistently found ways to help others who had even less. "I worked so much that I missed a lot of his games," Lucille continued, her voice carrying a note of old regret. "But I never missed seeing how he treated people. Coaches, teammates, opponents, janitors, cafeteria workers. Everybody was important to him." Sharif leaned forward, studying a photograph of his father at maybe 16, wearing a tuxedo that was clearly too small for his already massive frame. "What's this one from?" "Prom," Lucille smiled. "But not his prom. This girl in his class, Sarah Mitchell, her family couldn't afford for her to go. Her daddy had lost his job, and they were struggling just to pay rent. So your daddy used the money he'd been saving for new basketball shoes to rent a tuxedo and take her to prom." "Did he like her?" Miles asked with the curiosity of youth. "As a friend, sure. But that wasn't why he did it. He did it because he knew what it felt like to be left out, and he never wanted anyone else to feel that way if he could help it." The stories continued throughout the afternoon. Tales of a young man who shoveled snow for elderly neighbors, without being asked, who tutored younger kids in math even though he struggled with it himself, who organized neighborhood cleanup days, and somehow convinced teenagers to give up their Saturdays to pick up trash. "But the thing that made me most proud," Lucille said as she served them slices of sweet potato pie, "wasn't any of those individual things. It was the day he came home from school and told me he'd figured out what he wanted to do with his life." "Play basketball," Shakir guessed. "That's what I thought he was going to say. But no," he said, "Mama, I want to make enough money so that no kid in our building ever has to go to bed hungry, and no mother ever has to work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on." Shaq looked down at his plate, clearly moved by the memory. "I was maybe 15 when I said that. And you meant it," Lucille said firmly. "Even then, even when you had no idea how you were going to make that kind of money, you meant every word." She turned to her grandsons. "That's when I knew that no matter how tall he got, no matter how famous he became, he was going to stay the same good-hearted boy I raised, because his dreams weren't just about himself, they were about lifting up everyone around him." As the afternoon wore on, the conversation turned to the present. Lucille wanted to hear about her grandsons' lives, their interests, their dreams, but what struck the young men was how their father interacted with his mother in this small space. Gone was the larger-than-life celebrity, the imposing physical presence that commanded attention wherever he went. Here, he was simply a son, listening to his mother's stories with the same attention he'd probably given them as a child. "Grandma," Sharif said during a quiet moment, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, baby. How did you do it? Raise Dad to be so good when things were so hard?" Lucille was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. "You know, people think that having money makes it easier to raise good children, and maybe in some ways it does. You can give them opportunities, keep them safe, provide for their needs. But the most important things, kindness, respect, empathy, the willingness to work hard, those don't come from money." She gestured around the tiny apartment. "We didn't have much, but we had love. We had values. And we had a community that looked out for each other. Your daddy learned to be generous because he saw generosity all around him, even from people who had very little to give." "But what about when he made it big?" Miles asked. "Weren't you worried that success would change him?" "Oh, I was terrified," Lucille admitted with a laugh. "You have to understand. One day he's my baby living in this little apartment, and the next day he's on television making more money than anyone in our neighborhood had ever seen. I worried that he'd forget where he came from, forget the people who helped him get there. But he didn't," Shakir observed. "No, he didn't. And you know why? Because I made sure he understood that success was a responsibility, not just a reward. The more he had, the more he owed to others. That's not a burden. It's a privilege." As evening approached and the light in the small apartment grew softer, Lucille pulled out one final photograph. This one was recent, from the community center, showing Shaq with a group of children at what appeared to be a Christmas party. "This was taken last year," she said. "Your daddy flew in for one day, didn't tell anyone he was coming except me. He wanted to deliver Christmas presents to the kids at the center personally." The photograph showed Shaq in a Santa suit that was clearly custom-made to fit his enormous frame, surrounded by dozens of children whose faces glowed with joy and excitement. "He does this every year," Lucille continued. "Sometimes he can come in person, sometimes he can't. But those children always get their Christmas presents, and they always know they came from someone who understands what it's like to dream big from a small place. As they prepared to leave, Lucille embraced each of her grandsons tightly. "You boys remember what you've seen here this week," she said. "Not just the places, but the people. Remember that your daddy's success didn't happen in isolation. It happened because a whole community believed in him and supported him." "We will, Grandma," Sharif promised. "And remember something else," she continued, her voice growing more serious. "You have opportunities that your daddy never had. You have advantages that most children in this neighborhood still don't have. That's not something to feel guilty about. It's something to feel responsible for." Standing on the narrow stairway outside apartment 3B, the four men seemed to fill the entire space. But somehow, the tiny apartment behind them felt like the biggest place any of them had ever been. "Dad," Shakir said as they made their way down the stairs, "I need to apologize for something." "What's that, son?" "I used to think you were just lucky. Lucky to be tall, lucky to be athletic, lucky to make it to the NBA. But it wasn't luck, was it?" Shaq paused on the stairs and turned to face his sons. "Some of it was luck, son. I was lucky to be born to a mother like that. I was lucky to grow up in a community that cared about its children. I was lucky to have coaches and mentors who saw potential in me. But the rest of it?" Miles prompted. "The rest of it was choice. Every day I chose to work harder. Every day I chose to treat people with respect. Every day I chose to remember that my success was built on the foundation that other people laid for me." Outside, the clouds had finally opened up, and a gentle rain was beginning to fall. As they walked back to their car, the streets of Newark seemed different to the three young men than they had just a few days earlier. The same buildings, the same storefronts, the same people going about their daily lives, but now they saw it all through different eyes. "So what now?" Sharif asked as they reached the SUV. Shaq smiled, the first truly relaxed smile he'd worn since they'd arrived. "Now you decide what kind of men you want to be. Not because of what I've done, but because of what you've seen and what you've learned." As they drove away from the neighborhood, Miles turned to look back at the community center, the school, the corner store, and the apartment building that had shaped their father. "Dad, can we come back next year?" "Why?" Shaq asked, though he was clearly pleased by the question. "Because I want to volunteer at the community center. I want to help with the tutoring program." "Me too," Shakir added. "And I want to help with the basketball program." Sharif nodded in agreement. "We want to be part of this community, not just visitors to it." The rain was coming down harder now, but inside the SUV there was a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. For the first time in their lives, the three sons truly understood that their father's greatest achievement wasn't any trophy or championship ring. It was the man he had chosen to become, and the way he had never forgotten the people who helped him become that man. As Newark disappeared in the rearview mirror, they carried with them something more valuable than any inheritance: the understanding that true success isn't measured by what you accomplish for yourself, but by what you make possible for others. The journey home had taught them that home isn't just a place you come from. It's a responsibility you carry with you wherever you go. And in that moment, all three sons knew that they were ready to carry that responsibility forward, creating their own legacy of service, community, and love. The lessons of Apartment 3B would live on in them, just as they had lived on in their father, passing from one generation to the next like a torch that never dims but only grows brighter with time.